Welcome to my blog. My name is Tom Shue. Today we're going to be doing part 2 of our Lightroom to Photoshop Luminosity mask integration video. Uh, we left off in the first video where we had created a Luminosity mask selection, and we saved it. And now we're going to use this selection to edit our image. We're going to apply some sharpening and some other things to this image selectively. Right now we have the highlights selected, and what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll click on the RGB, just leave that selected, and we'll hit Control D to deselect it, because we can pull back that selection at any time. Say if we hit Select, right here, Selection, Load Selection, we can click on the L1 and it comes, or there's another shortcut in the keyboards. If you hit Control D to deselect, and if you hit Control Alt 2, that will also load the selection. Okay, so we're going to go onto our background layer and we're going to duplicate it. Hit Control J, that will create a new layer. We'll turn that layer off. So what we want to do is we want to make an edge selection, so that when we create a layer mask based on that selection, it's only going to select the edge detail and the highlight information. And then and if we wanted to do some adjustments with, say, noise reduction or something like that, that would be a surface selection, but we want to do an edge selection to do sharpening. We don't want anything applied to this background area or inside all of these dots. We only want just on the dark areas and the edges for sharpening to be applied. So I'll show you how this works. So now that we have our second layer selected and we've deselected it, we're going to load that selection. We could leave this, it doesn't matter. So we hit Control Alt 2, we'll load that selection. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a layer mask based on that luminosity selection. So if we come down here and we hit the Alt key, actually we're going to select this and hit the Alt key and this layer mask icon, you'll see that it's going to create a selection based on that luminosity mask selection. So if we want to load this up, if we hold down the Alt key and click on it, you can see that there's our mask based on that brightness selection. All of these points here and all that edge selection, this is what's been selected. And if you know, in Photoshop with masks, white reveals and black conceals. Okay, so we want to go ahead and make an edge selection. We don't want to select all this information because we want to just select the edges where the detail is that we want to sharpen. So if you go to Filter and you go to Stylize and you click Find Edges, it's going to select the edges of this image. I've made a shortcut. It's Alt Shift Control 1 because I use this a lot. If you go into your edit and your preferences, you can set a shortcut that you like. So we'll click Find Edges. Now you see that we have only the edges selected inside this mask. Now what we want to do is to make sure that there's enough contrast in there. We want to darken it and make sure there's a white point and a black point, because in our image there wasn't really a defined black and there wasn't really a defined white. We need to make sure that happens in this mask. Now when we do this adjustment, it's only happening to the mask, not the image. So we're going to hit Control L, that's a levels adjustment. Okay, and I'm going to slide this black point over, and you can see that this edge, this black, it's dark, but I'm not going to bring it over that far. I'm just doing this so you can see. So I'm going to create a defined black, and then I'm going to define the whites as well. Okay, back this off just a little bit. I don't think we need to go that much on the whites. Okay, we're going to click OK. Now if we were to zoom in, you could see the selection is based on all that texture and the edges of the rim and everything. So this would be a really hard transition for all of that sharpening detail. So we need to put a blur on this such the transition from the high to the low isn't so sharp. Just a small blur, maybe a 1 pixel blur. So with that mask selected, we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we're going to put a 1 pixel blur on it. This is a preview. When I click down, this is with none, and this is with that blur, so it's going to have a nice soft transition. See how sharp that is? There's it, soft. Okay, so now what we'll do is we can turn on this layer now. Okay, and I'm going to go up here and I'm going to create a blur on this image. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Actually, we're not going to do noise reduction. What we'll do is we'll just create our sharpening first. So we go to filter, other, and we click high pass. Okay, and depending on the size of the image, we'll determine how much of radius you would need. If you have a really large image, you would put it high, but for this image I think sharpening would be enough, around 3, 4 or something like this. So click OK, and we're gonna have to change our blend mode, and I like to use linear light. Okay, so now if you look at this image, let's zoom in here, and we'll turn off this area. You can see that this mask has sharpened all of the detail in the image. You can see how sharp it is around the goalposts, around the net. However, the sharpening hasn't been applied to the sky. And if it's too much sharpening, you can come into this and you can change the opacity actually of that layer, not the mask. So this would be your sharpening control. And if, say, we didn't like that edge detail up here, we can go back in and change our selection and modify that. But this is how you selectively apply sharpening using a luminosity mask. You can also do this for noise reduction. Say if we wanted to get rid of some noise, if we had noise here, we would, instead of an edge selection, we would create a surface selection. And I'll show you how to use luminosity masks to control noise and apply noise reduction in a future video. But that's going to be all we're going to do with luminosity masks. We'll do one more thing real quick here. Control D. We'll zoom just to fill the screen. Let's create a vignette for this guy. Zoom all. Just there we go. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to select this image, and we're going to grab the marquee selection tool. I'm going to drag in the image, create just a rough box. It would go to select, modify, refine edge, and we'll feather it. Okay, we'll feather it more, make it soft, and you can use the shift edge to make it go out, make the selection move out or move in. So I'd say somewhere around here would be fine. Click OK, and now we need to invert the selection. Right now it's selecting everything inside the box. If we hit Control I, it's Control Shift I, Control Z to get out of that, Control Shift I. We'll invert our selection. If we go here to curves, now that selection's been applied to this curve and it's created a mask, if we pull down here on the outside, we'll create a vignette. Let me just pull it over here just a little bit. Okay, now to hand the file back off to Lightroom, we just hit Save. So we go over here, File, and Save, and it's going to hand it back into Lightroom as a TIFF. It takes a second if you're dealing with a large file. So we drop this down, and there's Lightroom, and there's our image before we handed it off, and here's the image after we've handed it off and then handed it back in from Photoshop. So hopefully you learned something today, and Thanks for watching.